This video explores primitive reflexes and how they impact our lives. I'm talking with Wendy Nelson, founder of SenseEnabled.com. In episode 1, learn about the broad-ranging implications for young people, and in episode 2 of this two-part series, learn about the long-term impacts in adults. Why are we at this table together? Why are we talking? I've had my ideas, we've talked about this a little bit, and why did you decide that you wanted to come and have this conversation with me? And what is your background that brought you to your set of skills,
right,
that brings your skills to your new expertise?
Okay, well, where to start? My name's Wendy Nelson. I have started SenseEnabled.
Thanks, Wendy. Cheers.
I started SenseEnabled as a response to having worked with multiple children in multiple settings, and noticing over the years that the challenges they faced, more and more of these kids were having challenges learning, controlling their own behavior, controlling their own emotions. And so I kind of went to a friend who has been doing handle and reflex integration work for the last 27 years. She's the one I would go to when I would see something in the classroom or something I work as a nanny, so kids I take care of, I would see behaviors. She's the one I would go to, and I would say, what am I looking at? Mm-hmm. She lives in Minnesota, mm-hmm. So she's a good distance away. And she would say, what are you looking at? And I would tell her, well, they're walking flat-footed. They don't seem to be able to see the stairs. They're having breakdowns and transitioning. They can't sit still.
What do you mean breakdowns and transitioning?
So kids with sensory processing issues, ADHD, autism, will have trouble transitioning from one activity to another. Mm-hmm. So if you say, i.e. you're playing a game, you're playing with your Legos, and I say it's now time for lunch, and we have a huge meltdown about walking away from the Legos to go eat lunch.
Sure.
Or it's, we're going to go from school to the car, and it's a big traumatic thing, and there's a temper tantrum and problems with going from school to the car.
Which is a super basic task.
Yeah.
That adults probably to some degree take for granted.
And don't appreciate when they're in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And they want to, they come from work, they're picking their kid up at daycare, they want to get into the car and go do grocery shopping and go home. And
they've been visualizing the sequence of events since lunchtime when they thought about what's going to happen when I'm done with work and picking up their kid.
Right,
yeah.
And to them, it should be just as seamless. We walk out to the car, we get mm-hmm. in the car, we go to the grocery store, we go home, mm-hmm. and what's the big deal? To the kid, they've been in this daycare all day, they've been playing, they're mentally involved in this environment, and now all of a sudden mom or dad shows up. Great, good to see you. Oh, I have to leave now? What does that look like? I'm with you. That's a big mental... Right.
That's a mental environment schism.
And if you throw in some sensory issues...
Yeah.
So kids who have light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, smell sensitivity, mm-hmm. Tactility problems. Mm-hmm. So now I'm in an environment where I know where I'm at. I know mm-hmm. how I'm going to respond to this environment. I know what's going to come at me because I'm familiar with this. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going someplace else. Well, I don't know what that's going to smell like. I don't know how loud that's going to be. I don't know how bright that's going to be. The tags on my back of my shirt are bugging me. Mm-hmm. The lines in my socks are bugging me. The person next to me smells like bananas and it makes me sick to my stomach. Mm-hmm. And the radio's too loud, the lights are too bright, and you take me into a supermarket, right? A grocery store, mm-hmm. where you've got lots of smells, lots of sound, lots of people and bright lights. You've got fluorescent lights where you can hear the hum, see the flickering,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And it's been a long day, and
mm-hmm.
you want me to be a good kid,
and
I have
you're tired.
and I'm tired. I have
uh-huh.
no patience left for any of this.
Right.
And you have parents who maybe don't get what that's like to be in this little body.
And have their own stuff that they're dealing with,
Yeah.
because they're also tired, because they've also had a long day. They also had a fight with their spouse yesterday, and they're not thinking about their kid. They're thinking about, what's that conversation going to look like when I get home? Did I get the right salad dressing? Is this person going to be upset with me? Everybody's got their own stuff going on.
So taking the extra time
Yeah.
to understand that, or maybe not take the child to the store, or prepare them. It's going to be loud, it's going to smell, you can prep them, and sometimes that really helps for some kids or people to really be prepped. We're going to go into this environment, there's going to be these smells there, it's going to be loud, there's going to be lights, you may hear the buzz, you may see the flickering.
Sure. So we're talking about the idea of prepping as a strategy to help kids transition. Okay.
But these are the things that people run into. And so when I would see people having these problems, I would call Jan, and she would say, well, okay, so we've got these things going on, and she would say, well, you've got this, and this are what's happening.
Who's Jan?
Janet Oliver, Plan for Learning and Living.
Okay, planforlearningandliving.com.
.com.
Okay,
and
resource.
she is out of Minneapolis.
Okay.
She is finishing up her doctorate in this work.
Okay.
And has 27 years of experience. She got into these things to address issues that she had for herself and for her 4 daughters. And when I would have these questions, she's the one I would go to. And she would be able to tell me what was going on. And it was like, how did you do that? You're 1,000 miles away. You've never seen this child, and yet you've just described perfectly what I've been seeing and why.
Oh, so
it kind of looked like magic, kind of like a shaman, right? It was like, how did you know this?
So she's aware of the patterns.
So she
of
was
behavior.
aware of the patterns,
Okay.
and being able to know these patterns, then she could understand what was going on and help me explain it and help me understand what was going on so that I could help these kids.
The underlying physio-neurological
connections.
Dysregulation.
Right.
Dysregulation? Disconnectiveness? What is the misfire? Is there a misfire? Is there a lack of...
With the reflexes, what you have is the reflexes are designed to just work. I mean, it's like breathing, it's like blinking, it's swallowing, the heart beating. It's those things that just happen. The reflexes that we work with are primarily to help with birth, labor, to help with acclimating once you're born, to acclimate to gravity, which is a huge thing that
super weird.
We don't even really acknowledge.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of work for a baby to come out, and I mean, yes, they're flattened for the first couple weeks because it's like they've gone from this watery environment to this heavy environment, and there's a lot of these reflexes are all about gravity and being able to live in gravity and then get upright into gravity and function in gravity. So part of it is also for survival. You have reflexes, oral reflexes for sucking, for rooting, for turning the head to the breast and being able to suck. And so there's all these reflexes that are helping with you get acclimated to our environment as an infant. So
let's real quick the background idea, I think the foundational idea that is kind of not real, that we haven't even gotten to yet, is basically the foundational idea is that if you're the creator, if you're the manifester of life, of humans, and you print one human after the other, humans are basically more or less the same when they are born.
Right.
Over time. So humans today are the same organic creatures as humans 100 years ago, as humans 1,000 years ago, as humans 10,000 years ago, as humans 100,000 years ago, ish. Because at one point before that we're Cro-Magnon,
right?
And I don't know all the anthropology. I'm not an anthropologist. I just think about the bigger picture. And so as humans are born, they have to be able to thinking about it from a evolutionary perspective. How do I, as a human printer, sounds very futuristic. Whether it's born 10,000 years ago or today, the worlds are completely different. But how do I set that infant, that new baby, that new human being up for success in whatever environment, in whatever world it's built, in whatever world not built, but whatever world it's birthed into, so that it can learn how to, so it can develop agency.
Right.
Basically, so it can develop agency in the world. And that's actually a huge thing for me, because with a brain injury at the very end of high school and moving into college and going like, my brain doesn't work how I'm used to, my world isn't giving me the signals the way I'm used to receiving them.
Right.
I don't understand how this works. There's PTSD, there was TBI for sure, because personally there was a coma based on 2 concussions, initial and then a rebound, and then undiagnosed PTSD that complicates TBI.
Right.
So this not only speaks to the developing newborn, but also speaks to brain injury in general.
Right.
And all things that have to do with the function of consciousness. No?
Well, so there. If I'm designing a human being,
Mm-hmm.
there are a myriad of functions that need to just happen. So you don't have to make a choice to breathe. You don't have to make a choice to blink. You don't have to make a choice. So you're not thinking, I need to make my heart beat. I need to breathe in. I need to breathe out. There's a myriad of functions that are automatic.
Okay, so we're talking about...
We're looking, if you think of it like an automatic setting,
Mm-hmm.
these things need to happen so that you can be a functioning human being without having to have all your brain power taken just to stand up straight, breathe, heartbeat, and just be here, right? Just to be. So the reflexes are the things that are automatic, that your body does so that you don't have to think about it. They just do. Involuntary primary movements.
Okay.
and functions.
Uh-huh.
When those don't, because of trauma, whether it's birth trauma, whether it's trauma like an injury,
Okay.
a traumatic injury, doesn't even have to be an injury. It can be an emotional injury. It can be a whatever your system finds traumatic, can trigger some of these reflexes to pop back in. So
integrated and persistent.
Persistent means...
What does this mean?
Okay, so persistent reflexes have stayed longer than they should. You should have between...
Persistent, like a bratty reflex.
Bratty reflex, right? They won't go away.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And when they don't go away, that means your body is in control.
Mm-hmm.
So
You're involuntary.
So a good one for this is the Moro reflex, which is when you see a baby startled, right? You make a big noise and the babies go like this. When that stays, then what happens is you have people who startle at loud noises. They startle at bright lights. They startle when someone touches them and they don't expect it. They have higher anxiety. They may have more depression because this is always in this spiral of fight, flight, or freeze. Most people are familiar with fight, flight, or freeze. You're either angry when you get startled, or you freeze and you can't think, or you...
Deer in the headlights,
or you run. So when this persists, every time you get startled, your body is going, it's a bear!
Yeah.
I'm gonna die!
Right.
I better run! I better fight! I can't think, right?
T-Rex doesn't have object permanence. I better just stand still so he loses me.
Yeah. So what I do is I give you movement-based activities to help bring the morrow in, all the way integrated.
Okay. So
at which point, what happens then is that it's a bear. You get startled. It's a bear. Only this time, the upper brain's now involved. It's not just a body-driven reflex. So when the upper brain comes up, your brain can go
into the head.
Wait, it's not a bear. It's a spider. And I can smash it. I can put it in a jar and take it outside. But I now have options. I can now make choices about those, what happens. So instead of just being a body-driven thing that I really don't have much control over, it's now in the upper brain, and I can make a choice as to how I'm going to react to that stimuli. And that is the difference between having a persistent reflex where your body is in control, and having an integrated reflex where you can make a choice as to how to react to that stimulus.
I mean, that's fundamental to everything that a person becomes.
Right.
I mean, that's everything.
Yeah, but what happens is, for many people, because these are reflexes that should be in by the time you're, say, 3 years old, most of these should be in and functioning. If they're not, then it becomes part of your reality. It becomes part of your. People think it's just part of their personality. They think
just who I am.
It's who I am. Yeah. It's something I have to cope with. I have high anxiety. I startle at loud noises. I always have. I always will. And when you can do this work, all of a sudden it isn't who you are. You can see where that's not your personality. That's doesn't have to be part of your reality.
Sure.
You've got more control over it.
You talked about reflexes. We talked a little bit about, and I was probably a little long-winded about it, but the idea of humans being the same yet born into different times and needing to be able to adapt to whatever world they're in. So what is this idea of a reflex?
The idea of a reflex. I'm not sure there's an idea of it.
What is it? What is this thing? What is this reflex stuff? Like I've heard the word reflex a few times. Right. I know what it is because like we've talked about this, and I really get like I feel like I would like to say that I get developmental psychology to some extent.
Right.
I studied this in education school, and most people haven't. We're not necessarily. Technological creations, so you can't just swap in a new part.
Right.
Like what is this reflex thing, and how does that work?
Okay.
Can we talk about that?
Reflexes are involuntary. They are most of them are in the lower brain. Okay. Because what happens is they are in the body, things are coming through that lower brain to the upper brain. So it's that connection between the body and the upper brain.
Amygdala's in there somewhere. That's the emotional response mechanism.
Right. Or all of this has an emotional piece.
Okay.
Because of the way you respond.
Sure.
So, and especially over time, we start compensating for some of these things. So,
compensations is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well,
this is just who I am.
So, the spinal galant reflex is the one where you go to the
How many ish reflexes are there?
I deal with 8 primary reflexes.
Okay.
And then I deal with some oral and facial reflexes. Okay. And reflexes in the hands.
Okay, so back to spinal galant. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Spinal galant.
I'm a little all over the place.
Yeah, no, we are. And I'm trying to keep it together.
We're doing great. Yeah.
So the spinal galant is one of those that is for birth.
Okay.
And it gets you down. You're making a side to side motion to get down the birth canal.
Okay.
And what happens is if you have a C-section and you don't use that, then it stays.
So you have a persistent spinal galant
so you
reflex.
have persistent spinal galant reflex. So when the doctor comes in and he runs his finger down your back, if you've ever had a doctor's and they're checking your reflexes, right? They take a knuckle and they run it down either side of your spine. And you'll see people go like this, right? Because it's ticklish.
Sure.
It bothers them.
It's an indicator of an unintegrated,
of a persistent spinal galant reflex.
Okay.
So what happens is you have people who are, it keeps your back ticklish. Now people can be ticklish because of this reflex from the back of their neck all the way down as far as their knees. So if I have a persistent spinal galant, I may only like certain kinds of fabric or certain clothing because it's tickly. I can't sit still because if I lean back like this, it's too much pressure. It tickles. Sitting in a seat is hard because I'm ticklish down to my knees. So sitting still.
So kids in school are doing this a lot.
Gets to be a really hard thing, and because you're always trying to find that spot that's not pressured or tickly.
Okay, so real world. Kids, sit still.
Sit still. And you.
I don't know that I'm moving. Do they not know that they're moving? Like, are they just uncomfortable?
They are uncomfortable, and they can't tell you why they're uncomfortable. Right? They don't know why they're uncomfortable.
Damn.
It's just the way I am. I'm squirmy. I'm a fidgeter, right?
Oh.
I fidget.
Fidget spinners
I'm a fidget.
are the symptom.
They're a way of
economic
distracting. They're a way of distracting from that. So if I'm fidgeting with this, then maybe I can forget about how tickly all this is back here. But that's just one example of one of the reflexes and the way it can impact people. So, and from your brain's point of view, if I have to figure out a way to be able to distract you so you can sit still because this is bothering you, then I'm going to do a workaround. I'm going to find a way to make you forget about this for a little bit so you can do what you need to do. So you have people, that's when you have people who are like, you see the tongue helps, right?
Yeah.
Or the foot's always going. Right? Or, there's some other activity that has to be happening so that I can sit here and concentrate on reading or writing.
Sure.
To make that happen. And that's called differentiation. And when that happens, then you have people who don't realize that the tongue is going, or their mouth is moving, or that their feet are moving when they're trying to concentrate. It's an involuntary, unconscious activity that they're doing to be able to do that, and that's a compensation.
Sure.
So that you can concentrate.
Interesting.
So when you don't have to do that, then you have more bandwidth to focus on other things.
Right.
Because you're not trying to do 3 things at once, you are only doing 1 or 2 things at once.
That bandwidth idea is because when I hear Elon Musk talking about Neuralink, and he did an interview with Joe Rogan, and he's talking about that the problem with the human brain is a bandwidth problem. And how do you how do you open up the bandwidth so that the human brain has access to the information in its own consciousness?
Right.
And it seems like the bandwidth problem gets exacerbated by persistent reflexes.
Right.
Just to the nth degree.
Right. And
no wonder there's so much cognitive dysfunction in our society and around the world.
Well, and when you can bring, and this is something we are all designed to have. Okay.
Reflexes.
Yeah, totally. We all have them. When you can figure out which ones may be interfering, which ones are persistent, which ones are interfering, we can do this work, which is all movement-based activities designed to. I do an assessment, which is designed to pinpoint which ones are persistent, And then we work on getting those integrated, and it usually takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're in, and they're working. Because you're kind of pinging them is the best way to, best analogy. Like, it's not
provoking them a little bit.
You're kind of waking them up. You're saying,
Okay.
hey, okay, you're here. This is the way you should be working. Let's get you going along that track. And when they get integrated, then you don't have to worry about that anymore. They're there. They're functioning. They're in. They're working the way they should. And then if you've got other issues, say autism or ADHD, sensory processing issues, then I work with handle methods, which is the upper brain, to work with those sensory issues. And the
How do you
upper
spell
brain
handle?
issues. Handle. Just like the handle of a basket.
And where did handle come from?
Handle came from Judith Bluestone.
Who's that?
Judith Bluestone was a very brilliant woman who was dealing with autism herself, was very autistic, and she was also very brilliant. And so she studied all of these different methods and different disciplines to help her understand her own issues and to help her be able to deal with the world better. And as she did that, people were like, you need to share these things. And so that's what she did. And I'm not even going to go off any farther on this because that's a whole other subject that could have us, we could go off on that rabbit hole for a long time.
Okay.
But the handle methods, then once the reflexes are integrated, then if you still have other issues outside of the reflex issues, then we can work on the sensory processing issues with the upper brain, is the way I work. So I like doing the reflexes first because they kind of have an end point and you can get them in. The sensory processing issues with the upper brain are a little, they're a little more open-ended. They can be, there's some things that you can just work on forever for the rest of your life. You know, you can keep on working on them to improve them.
Okay.
So they don't have an end point quite as much as the reflexes. But once the reflexes are in, I have a much better idea of what is going on with the sensory, because this is now gone. This is cleared, and I can see what these other issues may be a little clearer.
That sounds like the reflexes are foundational.
They are a foundational piece. I mean, we all, like I said, we all have them. We all have these, and we all have these issues to some degree. Some people are much more impacted than others. And for people who have the learning issues, the autism, the ADHD, traumatic brain injury, every piece that you can take off, everything that you can take off that plate makes life better. It's
increases
one less
bandwidth
thing
for responding to the world.
Well, or makes the world a little easier. If you can put on a pair of socks and a pair of jeans and a shirt and not have to worry about what my clothes are going to feel like today. Can I wear my clothes today? Can I wear clothes today? So for some people it's, can I even wear clothes today?
Yeah.
Can I go out in the world dressed as a professional and not in pajamas?
Right.
Can I, I mean, there are people who are functioning with these issues.
Right.
So if I can make even 2 or 3 small changes that improve life, everything goes up. Because if I don't have to deal with these 3 things, then I've got more energy and focus to deal on the bigger things up here.
That's huge. That's like...
If I can grasp a pencil and sit in my seat and not have to worry about this is too tickly or this is too...
The idea of, literally the idea of holding a pencil in my finger can be tickly?
You have kids that will hold their pencils like this with a lot of force, because it takes that much energy, because they don't want to really touch the pencil, they don't really want to touch the paper or a table.
And not because they're being disagreeable or just
no, it's just
irreverent.
too tickly, or it's too much pressure for them. And if I'm feeling tickly back here, and I'm wiggling, and I'm trying to figure out how to write like this,
Yeah.
and I can hear the buzz of the light, and I can see the flicker, and I'm trying to write like this, and I've got low muscle tone, so I have to lean like this so that I can do this. And now you want me to write an analysis of a story I just wrote or read, right?
Right.
It's taking all my concentration and all my effort to hold the pencil, to write this here, to tune this out, and not be too tickly. So, and I'm supposed to write something coherent.
Right.
How much
my bandwidth
effort,
is this big.
How much effort
Right.
do I have for this when it's taking all I can do just to sit in my seat? So when you can cut out some of those issues, then I have more bandwidth to be able to absorb what I'm reading, to be able to
just pay attention to what's happening.
To put my thoughts together and then put it on a piece of paper coherently.
Right. It's one thing to be able to absorb the information. It's another thing to be able to assimilate the information and make it useful in your own brain.
Well, and to
awareness.
turn it out again to someone else's satisfaction. So
Totally. Oh my gosh.
when you can make these small changes, it makes huge changes. And the other part of this is when you have people that are so impacted in a family, they become the focus. So you have other children who aren't maybe getting as much attention as they'd like or they need because all of the attention has to go here.
Oh,
right?
So now we're talking about a way bigger...
Now when what happens here is when you can make this better here, and it don't need as much attention here, that means there's more attention here. That means mom and dad aren't as stressed, and maybe they aren't as worried, and so they have more to give. So when you can improve this over here, you can improve it for a whole family. You can improve life for everybody. And that improves and quite often improves the dynamic between the children as well, right?
Right, because that child is resentful of this child taking all the attention from mom and dad, but this child doesn't really necessarily even know that they're doing it because why are they in it?
Yeah, why do they always get all the attention? Because he's having a temper tantrum. Why does he get all the attention all the time? That's not fair. I'm being good.
Right.
And I don't get the attention.
Right.
He's misbehaving.
Right. So maybe I need to misbehave too, and then that becomes just who I am, and then trickle.
Or we're fighting constantly and hitting each other and being a pain to one another because, I don't have the bandwidth to be nice. I'm just trying to get through. I don't understand why being good, I'm not getting as much attention. So then you have that clash, right? So when you can improve some of these things for one, you can improve it for many. If you're improving it for this one, then what does that look like in a classroom?
Oh my God. What does it look like in a classroom?
What does it look like in a classroom?
Well,
so when I've been in a classroom. That's one of the reasons that I started this was because I was in a Montessori school and I had a classroom of 15 toddlers with one other adult in the classroom. And I had 4 children that had some of these issues.
Okay. 4 out of how many?
15.
4. Okay, so like a quarter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I spent probably a good 60 to 75% of my time with those 4 kids.
Oh.
Because they always needed to be, toddlers are hard anyway, but they always needed to be watched. They always needed to be redirected. They always needed you to be right there, kind of directing them, kind of handling the behavior, kind of trying to make sure that everything was running smoothly, that how they were interacting with the other kids. So that's just a toddler classroom, and we're just learning how to, play with sand, play with beans, get along with our friends.
Right.
Now you put that in an academic classroom where you have a teacher with 20 or 30 kids. Maybe she has an assistant, and she's got 2 or 3 of these kids in her classroom. You cannot give everyone the amount of attention that they need. And these kids are disruptive. And not because they're bad kids or bad people in any situation. These are people that are extremely stressed and trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and they may not understand what it is, why they do what they do, why they react the way they do.
Wonky wiring.
Yeah. So when you can get them to a place where they can sit still, where they can function, where they can pay attention, where they can participate without speaking out of turn, or they can get some impulse control. They aren't as they can make a transition from going from the classroom to lunch to the gym. Right? They can make these transitions without having a breakdown or a meltdown or having to be walked very carefully through all these things. It makes a huge difference in a classroom, because then you can pay attention to more of the kids. Everybody can interact a little better.
Right.
So, and when teachers understand what's going on.
Oh, because when teachers don't understand, then that's a bad kid. And then that's a bad kid becomes that kid's identity, because that's just who they are, which we talked about at the beginning. And then that becomes a sociological problem as that kid becomes an adult.
So we talked a little bit about the differentiation when you've got to do this so that you can write, right? And you got to this. So you have the kid that kicks underneath the desk, right? And they're kicking, and they don't realize they're kicking, but they're kicking the kid across from them. And the other kid's going, "You're kicking me. You got to stop."
And they don't even know they're kicking.
And they're going, "No, I'm not." And they're going, "Yeah, you are." And the kid next to him says, "Yeah, you were. I saw you."
That reminds me of elementary school.
Okay, but this is where you see these things,
school,
right?
Yeah.
And so
stop bullying me.
What happens is that these kids, well, I didn't do it, because they don't realize this is an involuntary motion they don't realize they're making.
Almost like there's bandwidth that's conscious bandwidth, and then there's bandwidth that's unconscious bandwidth.
This is unconscious movement, involuntary movement. So what happens is you've got 3 people that say, "I'm kicking." I'm saying, "No, I didn't."
Right.
Well, you're a liar. We saw you. You're a liar. Right? And so you get that, and then you get enough of that. Well, then the teacher backs that up. Well, yes, we all saw you kicking. So now you are not so sure of yourself, because they said, "I did it, but I know I didn't." The teachers now called me, kids are calling me a liar, and the teacher has kind of reinforced that with like, "Yeah, you are."
So you're getting bullied by all your peers
so
and
now
by the teacher.
You are a liar.
Right.
You're a little self-conscious and not as certain about what you do or don't know, which in turn is going to impact your self-confidence. And now that's impacted your emotional and your self-confidence and your self-image. So
whoa.
Right? So these are the things.
This is huge.
These are the things that I saw that compelled me to start doing this work.
So let's stop there. We've just really gone through a huge problem set across every sector, because basically this affects everybody. Like we said, just real quick, we said that you said 4 out of 15, so I'm thinking roughly a quarter of the population still has these unintegrated reflexes, or has had some kind of brain injury or some kind of something
whether if it's retained reflexes, if it's autism, if it's ADHD, sensory processing issues, learning issues, it can be TBI, it can be stroke in adults. For some people, well, all of us, as we age, the compensations that we made for all these things, right?
Yeah, the
get harder and harder.
To break, or get harder and harder?
They get harder and harder to keep up.
Oh.
So if I've got these things that I'm doing to help me get through a day, as I age, they start to break down. They don't work as well anymore.
And so what happens?
So what happens is people do different things to now you have to find new ways to compensate, or you start shrinking in because you're trying to protect the world, control the world, make it more safe. So if I don't feel like I can go out and safely do things, then I'm going to stay inside and limit my contact with other people, or limit those situations in which I don't feel I can function well anymore.
When agency is restricted, when agency is minimized.
When you start to have those, I mean, it happens with old age anyway, right? I mean, you've got all sorts of things that are, I'm 62, you have all sorts of things that are starting to come into play. Nothing works the way it used to. But when your way of, all of a sudden the things that worked for you don't, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I don't go to bars anymore, or I don't go to restaurants anymore because I can't take the noise. It's too much input, too many noises, too much sound, too many people, everything's coming at me. I can't do it. So I may love music. I may love to go out and listen to live music, but I will get to a point where the smell of a bar and the sound of a bar and the chatter of the people, I can't distinguish the voices anymore. So it's just this loud buzz. I won't go. And I start missing out on maybe the pleasure of going to that environment, listening to live music, and being able to socialize with these people. So I become more isolated, little more by little more.
I mean, how many people in the world are in that situation where they're imploded? The word I've used for that same thing is that I imploded.
Right.
I mean, I've played music forever, and I still play a bunch, and there was a while where I didn't go out because there was too much noise. It was just too much environment, and I just and I can totally relate to the idea of growing up and growing up.
Too much sensory input.
Oh my God.
I had one little girl tell me that the sound was too big for her ears. And I loved that because it gives you that. It was like, yeah, I've been to a Who concert. I know what that feels like. The sound is too big. It's too much. I just can't cram it in there.
I don't have the bandwidth to process it all at once.
I can't process that much.
Whether it's loud or it's quiet,
could be loud.
it's perceived.
It doesn't even have to be loud.
Right.
For some people, audio processing, trying to pull one sound out of a room full of voices,
that's hard.
Is hard.
I talk to musicians all the time who hear 3 conversations at once.
Yeah. If I'm in a room, I'm listening to you. I can be listening to the people behind me. I can hear the phone or something going on over there, and I know that I do that. I mean, and I have to intentionally put my attention here because I'm listening to the music, I'm listening to 2 other conversations, and I'm trying to both give you all of my attention.
Which is very hard.
It's hard.
And that sounds like one of the compensations that breaks down as you get older.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Or you have people who can process three words. They can process 3. But after 4, you really do sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. And then they will come back in. But they're losing like 2 or 3 words of every sentence or every conversation because they have low muscle tone. And the low muscle tone will translate into the inner ear muscles being able to hold that and being able to process that sound coming in. Right.
So one more quick idea about that idea of low muscle tone and that being ears. I know we're getting to 54 minutes here on the recording, which will probably we'll trim off the first few minutes.
Too far.
I'm having so much fun talking to you. Yeah, we're going to get
I've drifted.
Let's, so real quickly, the idea of low muscle tone with ears, I get to that idea. I worked for a learning clinic that specialized in some of this stuff, and then found you, which was super great. The inner ear. There's a book by a guy named Paul Madaule, Madaule, and he wrote a book called. There's this idea of aural zoom. So the idea that the inner ear has is muscles, and the bone, the tendons in the inner ear hold the bone in place, the stapes, or I think maybe, and it vibrates, and it picks up some sounds more than other sounds because there's so many noises happening all the time. How do you tune into one specific sound? And muscle tone affects your ears and consciousness's ability to tune into a sound. So tuning in is a really significant concept there.
Right.
And with that idea, I would like to go to episode number 2 of this wonderful Wendy Nelson special.